Something older than thought has always lived beneath your breath. It moves in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, steady and patient, untouched by the noise of the world, long before names, roles, and expectations gathered around you. This presence already knew you, not as a body, not as a story, but as awareness, clear and complete, resting inside a greater field of life. What feels like longing is not absence, it is recognition. It is the memory of a state where nothing was divided, where nothing had to be earned, where being itself was enough. That memory never vanished. It only became quiet so that experience could become vivid. Consciousness chose contrast, not because it was lacking, but because discovery deepens when it is earned through movement, emotion, and time. Before this life took shape, awareness accepted the narrowing that allows form to exist. Boundaries appeared, not as punishment, but as instruments of perception. With boundaries came perspective, and with perspective came the ability to witness, to feel, to grow. What followed was not exile, but immersion. The soul stepped into matter the way light enters water, not to disappear, but to learn how to shimmer in another medium. From that moment, forgetting became part of the design, not total forgetting, only enough to make the journey real, enough to allow surprise, struggle, attachment, and wonder. Memory retreated from the surface and settled deeper, into instinct, emotion, and intuition. It remained active, guiding quietly, shaping attraction and aversion, stirring restlessness when the outer world felt too small for what lived inside. That restlessness is not a flaw, it is guidance. It is the inner compass responding when the current of life pulls you toward greater awareness. Comfort dulls it, routine hides it, noise buries it, yet it returns whenever stillness appears, whenever loss clears space, whenever beauty interrupts the ordinary. In those moments, something familiar rises without words and reminds you that more exists than what the eyes can measure. As a child, this knowing felt close. The world seemed alive, not as objects, but as presence. Silence felt full. Imagination moved easily between inner and outer worlds. Then instruction arrived. Attention was trained outward. Value was placed on results, comparison, speed. The inner landscape slowly became background. What once felt natural began to feel distant, as if it belonged to another version of you. Yet the deeper self never withdrew. It only learned to wait. It speaks in subtle ways, through attraction to meaning, through discomfort with empty success, through the quiet sense that life is meant to be more than repetition and survival. It does not shout. It does not argue. It simply remains, steady and certain, until awareness turns inward again. Awakening does not begin with effort. It begins with recognition. Recognition that the sense of separation has always been partial. Recognition that behind every thought, emotion, and sensation, a witnessing presence remains unchanged. That presence is not created by belief. It exists prior to belief. It is the field in which belief appears. This recognition shifts the direction of attention. Instead of searching for completion in outcomes, awareness begins to rest in being. Instead of chasing identity, the observer becomes more important than the mask. The story does not disappear, but it loosens its grip. Events are no longer proof of worth. They become expressions of movement, not measures of value. The call of the source is not dramatic. It is gentle and persistent. It does not demand withdrawal from the world. It invites deeper participation without attachment. It invites action without identification, love without possession, ambition without fear. It invites a way of living where effort flows from alignment rather than resistance. Memory awakens not as images from another realm, but as clarity in this one, a quiet confidence that does not depend on praise, a calm that remains even when circumstances shift, a compassion that does not require agreement. These are not virtues to acquire. They are qualities that surface when attention returns to its origin. As memory awakens, perception changes. Experiences begin to feel connected, not random. Encounters carry meaning beyond chance. Inner states and outer events begin to mirror one another more clearly, not as reward or punishment, but as feedback, showing how consciousness shapes interpretation and response. Responsibility replaces blame, not as burden, but as freedom. Freedom emerges when the sense of identity softens, when being is no longer confined to roles, labels, or past conclusions. When awareness recognizes itself as the space in which all movement occurs, this does not erase personality. It refines it. The surface becomes more flexible because it is no longer asked to carry the weight of existence. The return of memory does not separate you from others. It dissolves the illusion that separation ever existed. Compassion grows not from obligation, but from recognition that the same awareness looks through every set of eyes. Differences remain, yet hostility loses its foundation. Competition gives way to understanding. Comparison loses relevance when worth is no longer measured externally. This remembrance does not happen once. It deepens through practice, through presence, through the willingness to meet each moment without escape. Attention learns to settle. Reaction slows. Space opens between impulse and response. In that space, choice appears. And with choice, consciousness becomes active rather than automatic. Life does not become perfect. It becomes transparent. Challenges still arise, but they no longer define identity. Pain is felt, but it no longer dictates direction. Success arrives, but it no longer feeds the false idea of completion. Everything becomes movement within a stable field rather than proof of self. The call continues even when it seems ignored. It works through cycles of expansion and contraction, through curiosity and exhaustion, through hope and surrender. Each return to presence strengthens familiarity with the deeper state, until awareness no longer feels like a visitor in its own home. This is not a journey towards something distant. It is a shift in orientation, from outward dependence to inward stability, from identification with form to recognition of source, from searching to remembering. The quiet certainty that grows from this shift does not need explanation. It expresses itself through steadier attention, clearer intention, and a softer relationship with uncertainty. As memory awakens, trust replaces control, not blind trust in outcomes, but trust in alignment. Trust that awareness itself guides movement when noise subsides. Trust that nothing essential can be lost, because what is essential was never an object to possess. This trust does not remove responsibility. It clarifies it. Action becomes simpler, less reactive, more precise. Decisions arise from coherence rather than fear. Direction emerges from resonance rather than pressure. The inner world begins to lead, and the outer world begins to respond. The call of the source is not an escape from life. It is an invitation to inhabit life more fully, without confusion about who is living it. It restores the sense of participation without entanglement, involvement without loss of center. In this remembering, nothing needs to be forced. Awareness recognizes itself the way light recognizes its own brightness, not by effort, but by presence. What unfolds from here is not a departure from ordinary experience, but a deeper entry into it, where each moment carries the quiet imprint of something timeless, steady, and already complete. Form requires limits. Without limits, there is no edge to touch, no contrast to reveal shape, no tension to generate movement. Awareness enters experience by narrowing itself, the way light becomes visible when it passes through glass. This narrowing is not loss, it is focus. It is how infinity learns to see itself in detail. The veil of forgetfulness is part of this focus, not a barrier meant to trap, but a filter that allows immersion. Without it, every moment would carry full awareness of origin, and experience would lose depth. Choice would dissolve into certainty. Discovery would collapse into knowledge already complete. The veil makes learning possible by allowing surprise, attachment, and consequence to feel real. Within this narrowing, identity begins to form. Sensation defines boundaries. Memory strings moments into narrative. Desire pulls attention forward. Fear anchors attention to protection. These forces are not mistakes. They are tools that stabilize awareness within time, allowing the soul to explore what it means to move, to care, to risk, to hope. Human experience is not chosen for comfort. It is chosen for richness. Emotion sharpens perception. Limitation intensifies appreciation. Fragility awakens tenderness. Even pain plays a role, not as punishment, but as signal, drawing attention to imbalance and separation within consciousness. Through the veil, life appears as effort. Survival seems primary. Competition feels necessary. Comparison shapes value. These conditions train attention to remain outward, measuring self through circumstance. Yet beneath this training, awareness continues to observe. It absorbs texture, tone, and nuance, expanding its capacity to understand itself through relationship with form. The soul does not enter human life to prove worth. Worth is not in question. It enters to experience participation, to know what it means to grow through interaction rather than remain in perfect stillness. It enters to explore how consciousness behaves when it must choose, adapt, and respond within changing conditions. Every challenge becomes a classroom for attention. Patience develops when outcomes are delayed. Compassion develops when vulnerability is witnessed. Integrity develops when choices carry visible consequences. These qualities cannot be downloaded into awareness. They emerge only through lived engagement, where thought becomes behavior and intention becomes action. The veil allows personality to develop. Preferences appear. Strengths and sensitivities take shape. This individuality does not contradict unity. It enriches it. Unity expresses itself not by erasing difference, but by exploring infinite variation within shared essence. Each perspective becomes a unique lens through which awareness studies itself. Because memory of origin remains muted, external attachment becomes intense. Relationships feel essential. Achievement feels defining. Loss feels catastrophic. These reactions deepen emotional investment, which in turn deepens experiential learning. The heart becomes a sensitive instrument, registering subtle shifts in connection and meaning. At times, the weight of involvement becomes heavy. Disappointment accumulates. Effort seems unrewarded. In those moments, something quieter begins to stir beneath the surface of ambition and fear. The longing that arises is not for escape, but for understanding. It is the beginning of memory pressing upward through layers of distraction. This longing does not arrive as philosophy. It arrives as fatigue with empty pursuit, as discomfort with roles that no longer fit, as attraction to stillness, meaning, and truth beyond appearance. Awareness begins to sense that it is more than the conditions it reacts to. The veil does not lift all at once. It thins gradually, as attention becomes less dominated by reaction and more grounded in observation. Moments of clarity appear, brief but distinct, where perception feels spacious and connected. These moments are not special experiences. They are reminders of a state that never left, only became obscured by intensity of focus. Human experience provides the friction necessary for these shifts to matter. Without resistance, awareness would not recognize its own expansion. Without confusion, clarity would not feel significant. Without limitation, freedom would not be meaningful. The very conditions that seem to restrict growth are the ones that stimulate it. The soul enters time to participate in unfolding. It enters uncertainty to develop trust. It enters effort to cultivate endurance. It enters vulnerability to awaken compassion. These qualities are not required for perfection, but they deepen expression. They allow awareness to know itself not only as existence, but as relationship. Each lifetime becomes a chapter in a longer movement of understanding. Circumstances differ, yet patterns repeat until insight replaces habit. Situations arise not to punish, but to reveal where attention remains contracted. When perception shifts, experience follows, not as reward, but as natural alignment between inner state and outer response. The veil ensures that learning feels personal. Success feels earned. Failure feels instructive. Identity forms around participation, making growth intimate rather than abstract. Through this intimacy, Awareness develops empathy for every form navigating limitation. Because limitation is no longer theoretical, it has been lived. This empathy gradually dissolves harsh judgment. Others are no longer viewed as obstacles or competitors, but as fellow travelers within their own narrowing of focus. Understanding expands from tolerance to genuine recognition of shared process. As awareness matures within form, attachment softens, goals remain, but they no longer define worth. Effort continues, but it no longer feels desperate. Identity shifts from performance to presence. Life becomes less about proving and more about expressing. This shift does not require withdrawal from responsibility. It refines responsibility by aligning it with deeper values. Action becomes quieter, steadier, less driven by fear of lack, and more guided by coherence with inner truth. The veil continues to function, but it no longer dominates. Memory of source does not overwhelm experience, yet it stabilizes it. The human story remains, but it is held within a wider awareness that recognizes both struggle and peace as movements within the same field. Through this balance, participation becomes conscious. Choices reflect understanding rather than reflex. Emotion becomes information rather than command. Awareness begins to live through form rather than being confined by it. Human experience, then, is not a fall from grace. It is a focused exploration of grace within limitation. It is the laboratory where infinite awareness learns what it means to care, to persevere, to connect, and to transform. The veil remains gentle, allowing presence to deepen without erasing the richness of form. Life continues with all its textures, but now it is met from within rather than chased from without. In this meeting, experience becomes less about survival and more about expression, less about separation and more about shared unfolding within a field that has always been whole. Identity begins as a practical necessity. Awareness needs a point of reference to move through time, to protect the body, to navigate social structure, to remember commitments and learn from consequence. This reference becomes the sense of self, the voice that says mine and me, the organizer of experience. It is not an enemy. It is an instrument. Ego forms around continuity. It collects memories, preferences, beliefs, and expectations, shaping a storyline that explains where you have been and predicts where you are going. This storyline stabilizes behavior. It creates consistency. It allows learning to accumulate. Without it, experience would fragment into isolated moments without direction. The difficulty begins when the instrument is mistaken for the source, when the storyline becomes the owner of awareness rather than a tool within it, when identity contracts around labels, achievements, wounds, and comparisons. Attention narrows further, and the deeper sense of being recedes into the background. In this contraction, protection becomes priority. Fear organizes thought. Approval becomes currency. Control becomes strategy. These responses are not moral failures. They are survival mechanisms activated by identification with form. When identity feels fragile, the world appears threatening, and vigilance seems necessary. Incarnation turns this dynamic into a game of perspective, not a trivial game, but a structured environment where awareness explores how it behaves when it forgets its own vastness. Rules appear in the form of physical laws, social systems, emotional conditioning, and inherited belief. Within these rules, personality develops, adapts, compares, cooperates, succeeds, fails, and evolves. The game works because it feels real. Stakes feel personal. Outcomes seem final. Attachment intensifies. Investment deepens. Through this intensity, attention sharpens. Consciousness becomes fully engaged in the unfolding of events rather than observing from a distance. Yet, even within deep involvement, moments of separation from the storyline occur. A pause between reaction and response, a sense that thoughts are being watched, a quiet awareness that remains unchanged while emotion rises and falls. These moments reveal that identity is something experienced, not something that experiences. This distinction changes the relationship with ego. Instead of battling it, awareness begins to include it. Thoughts, impulses, and defenses are seen as movements within consciousness rather than definitions of it. The storyline continues, but it loses absolute authority. Ego does not dissolve when seen clearly. It relaxes. It stops working as hard to prove worth, defend image, and control outcome. Its function shifts from dominance to coordination. It becomes a useful interface between inner intention and outer action. When this shift begins, life feels less like combat and more like participation. Challenges remain, but they are no longer interpreted as threats to existence. They become situations to engage, learn from, and move through. Identity becomes flexible rather than rigid. The game of incarnation relies on contrast. Strength becomes meaningful through vulnerability. Choice becomes meaningful through consequence. Love becomes meaningful through the risk of loss. Ego is the structure that allows these contrasts to be felt deeply rather than observed abstractly. Without ego, there would be no personal journey, no emotional learning, no unique expression of awareness. The goal is not to erase identity, but to allow it to serve rather than rule. To let the character play its role without believing it is the entire stage. As awareness stabilizes in observation, compassion for the self increases, patterns are seen without condemnation, habits are recognized without shame. Growth becomes a process of refinement rather than self-correction through punishment. Inner dialogue softens. Motivation shifts from fear to coherence. This inner coherence begins to influence outer behavior. Decisions align more with long-term well-being than short-term relief. Relationships become less about validation and more about connection. Conflict becomes less personal and more situational. Responsibility becomes grounded in clarity rather than guilt. The storyline still matters, but it is no longer the source of identity. It becomes an expression of awareness, moving through form. Success no longer inflates self-worth. Failure no longer diminishes it. Both become feedback rather than verdict. This change alters how incarnation is experienced. Instead of feeling trapped inside circumstances, awareness begins to feel present within them. Instead of resisting limitations, it learns to work with them. Instead of seeking escape, it explores engagement with greater understanding. The game becomes conscious. Moves are chosen with awareness of impact. Energy is invested where growth is supported rather than where fear seeks control. Attention returns more easily to stillness after activity, restoring balance between action and rest. This balance does not remove emotion, it stabilizes it. Joy becomes less dependent on outcome. Sadness becomes less consuming. Anger becomes information rather than identity. Emotional waves pass through a wider field of presence, leaving insight rather than residue. Identity, then, becomes a vessel rather than a prison. It carries awareness through experience while allowing space for recognition of deeper being. The vessel changes over time, shaped by learning, yet the awareness within remains constant. Through this recognition, incarnation is no longer perceived as exile. It becomes a chosen field of exploration where awareness studies its own responses under conditions of limitation and diversity. Each role played adds nuance to understanding, not by accumulating knowledge, but by refining perception. The sense of self expands beyond the boundaries of personal narrative. Empathy arises naturally, not from obligation, but from recognition of shared process. Other lives are seen as parallel journeys through similar challenges, shaped by different circumstances, but moved by the same underlying drive toward understanding. As this recognition deepens, competition loses intensity. Cooperation becomes intuitive. Comparison fades as purpose shifts from proving to expressing. Identity becomes less about standing out and more about contributing authentically to the movement of life. The ego remains, but it is no longer isolated. It operates within a wider awareness that guides without force. Personality expresses without clinging. Action unfolds without the constant pressure of self-definition. In this state, the game of incarnation continues, but its tone changes. The same events occur, yet they are met with steadier attention. The same choices arise, yet they are guided by coherence rather than defense. The storyline unfolds, but it is held within a larger sense of being that does not depend on its outcome. Presence becomes the anchor, not an escape from experience, but the ground that supports it. Identity becomes transparent, allowing awareness to move freely through roles, relationships, and challenges without becoming confined by them. In this transparency, life feels less like a struggle for survival and more like a dynamic expression of consciousness exploring itself through form. The game remains meaningful, but it is no longer mistaken for the source of meaning. Meaning is recognized as the awareness that witnesses and participates in every move, steady and unchanged, even as the character continues to grow and evolve within the unfolding story. Experience does not unfold at random. Beneath visible events, a quiet structure guides attention towards specific lessons, relationships, and turning points. This structure is not rigid destiny. It is a framework, an arrangement of tendencies and possibilities shaped by prior understanding and unfinished growth. The soul carries memory, not as personal stories, but as patterns of awareness. These patterns influence attraction, fear, talent, and sensitivity. They shape what feels familiar, what feels challenging, and what repeatedly draws attention. Through them, experience organizes itself around themes rather than isolated incidents. This organization forms a blueprint, not a script that dictates every moment, but a landscape of probability that invites certain encounters and circumstances. Within this landscape, choice remains active. Response determines how deeply lessons are integrated and whether patterns repeat or transform. Some situations appear again and again until perception changes, not because life insists on punishment, but because awareness learns through recognition. When reaction remains unconscious, experience continues to mirror the same imbalance. When perception shifts, the pattern loosens and new movement becomes possible. Relationships play a central role in this architecture. Certain connections feel immediate and intense, as if recognition precedes explanation. These bonds do not always bring comfort. Often they bring friction, because they activate areas where awareness is still developing. Through closeness, hidden tendencies surface and demand attention. These encounters are not accidents. They arise where growth is most efficient, where emotional engagement ensures that learning cannot be ignored. The soul arranges proximity not to guarantee harmony, but to stimulate clarity. Love, conflict, loyalty, and loss all become instruments of insight when viewed through this lens. Challenges also follow recognizable lines. Some people face repeated issues around security, others around expression, others around control, trust, or belonging. These themes reflect areas where attention is still learning balance. Circumstances arrange themselves to highlight these edges, not to trap, but to reveal. The blueprint does not remove uncertainty. It channels it. It provides terrain, not outcome. Within that terrain, countless paths remain available. Small decisions shape large shifts over time. A single change in perception can redirect years of experience by altering the way attention responds to similar stimuli. This flexibility preserves freedom. Growth remains responsive rather than predetermined. The soul does not seek perfection of circumstance, but refinement of awareness. Therefore, no situation is fixed. Every moment remains open to reinterpretation and adjustment. Understanding this architecture changes the meaning of difficulty. Obstacles no longer appear as barriers imposed from outside. They are seen as points of concentration where awareness is being invited to strengthen. Resistance softens when purpose is recognized beneath pressure. This does not require acceptance of harm or injustice. It encourages clarity of response rather than collapse into helplessness. When awareness understands that growth operates through engagement, action becomes grounded rather than reactive. Responsibility shifts from blaming conditions to shaping perception and choice within them. The blueprint also includes opportunity. Talents emerge early and persist even when ignored. Certain activities produce deep satisfaction that does not depend on reward. These signals indicate channels where expression aligns naturally with inner structure. Following them does not guarantee ease, but it brings coherence between intention and action. When expression aligns with inner design, effort feels meaningful rather than draining. Challenges remain, but they are met with energy rather than exhaustion. This alignment does not remove struggle, but it reduces friction between what is being lived and what is being learned. The soul does not measure success by visibility or recognition. It measures by integration, by whether understanding has deepened, by whether compassion has expanded, by whether awareness has become more stable within changing conditions. External markers may reflect this process, but they are not its center, because learning is the priority. Situations are arranged to activate growth rather than comfort. Comfort may appear as rest between phases of effort, but it is not the destination. The destination is not an endpoint, but increasing coherence between awareness and expression. This coherence develops gradually. At first, patterns feel imposed. Later, they are recognized. Eventually, they are navigated consciously. Awareness moves from being carried by experience to participating in its direction. As participation increases, intuition strengthens. Choices begin to align more closely with inner clarity rather than social expectation or fear. Decisions feel quieter, less dramatic, more precise. Direction becomes less about ambition and more about resonance. This resonance does not isolate. It improves relationship because it reduces projection. When individuals follow their own alignment, they place fewer demands on others to provide meaning or stability. Connection becomes exchange rather than dependence. The blueprint of each lifetime includes both individual growth and contribution to collective movement. Personal insight influences group dynamics. Shifts in perception ripple outward through behavior, communication, and example. No transformation remains private, because expression always affects shared space. This interconnection does not erase individuality. It places individuality within context. Personal lessons become part of a wider learning environment where each person both teaches and learns, often without awareness of the larger pattern being served. From this view, timing gains importance. Certain insights cannot be forced. Readiness develops through accumulation of experience. Patience becomes a form of trust in the intelligence of unfolding. Pushing against timing creates tension, while cooperating with it creates flow. Cooperation does not mean passivity. It means acting with awareness of internal signals rather than external pressure alone. It means recognizing when persistence serves growth and when release serves clarity. Both are necessary, and both are guided by increasing sensitivity to inner alignment. As awareness matures, the blueprint becomes less about correction and more about expression. Early phases focus on balancing imbalance. Later phases focus on sharing understanding through presence, creativity, and service. Growth turns outward, not as obligation, but as natural extension of coherence. At this stage, experience feels less corrective and more collaborative. Life becomes a dialogue between intention and response, rather than a struggle between desire and resistance. The architecture continues to guide, but with lighter touch, allowing freedom to shape form within stable awareness. The sense of being directed by unseen structure shifts into a sense of moving with it. Events feel coordinated rather than imposed. Even difficulty is met with steadier attention, because its role within development is understood. This understanding does not eliminate effort. It gives effort context. Work becomes meaningful when it is seen as participation in refinement rather than proof of worth. Rest becomes meaningful when it is seen as integration rather than escape. Through this rhythm, the blueprint reveals its true purpose, not to control outcome, but to support awareness as it learns to express itself fully within form. Not to limit, but to focus growth where it can be most effective. The architecture of the soul, then, is not a cage. It is a scaffold. It supports construction while allowing shape to change. It provides stability while encouraging exploration. It holds attention steady while experience deepens understanding. Within this structure, Freedom remains alive. Choice remains active. Awareness continues to refine how it moves, responds, and creates meaning. The blueprint guides without confining, offering direction without dictating destination. As this becomes clearer, trust replaces resistance. Participation becomes conscious. Life feels less like a series of accidents and more like a coherent movement of learning through form. Experience remains dynamic, yet it unfolds within an underlying intelligence that steadily guides attention toward greater clarity, balance, and expression within the unfolding journey. Learning does not end when a body rests. Awareness continues, carrying forward the momentum of understanding and the areas still seeking balance. Reincarnation is not a cycle of reward and punishment. It is continuity of learning. The way a river continues its course even as the landscape changes. Karma is often misunderstood as fate imposed from outside. In truth, it is the natural movement of cause and effect within consciousness. Every intention shapes perception. Every perception shapes response. Every response shapes future experience. Not because a force is keeping score, but because awareness learns through feedback. What remains unresolved does not disappear. It seeks expression again, not to trap, but to complete its understanding. When patterns repeat, it is not because growth failed, but because attention has not yet recognized what is being asked to change. This movement is not personal in the way the ego interprets it. It is not about blame or merit. It is about coherence. Awareness seeks harmony between inner state and outer expression. When these are misaligned, experience reflects the gap. When alignment improves, experience reorganizes accordingly. Reincarnation provides continuity for this process. It allows themes to evolve beyond the limits of a single lifetime. Tendencies formed under one set of conditions can be explored under others, allowing deeper refinement. Sensitivity developed in one context may become strength in another. Fear learned in one chapter may become compassion in the next. Nothing essential is lost between lives. What is released is surface memory, the storyline tied to specific roles and identities. What remains is understanding, pattern, and capacity. These shape new circumstances in ways that continue learning without repeating the same outer form. This continuity explains why certain tendencies appear early. Some children carry deep empathy. Others display resilience. Others confront intense challenges without visible cause. These are not accidents. They reflect momentum of awareness moving forward through new expression. Karma operates not as rigid destiny, but as dynamic guidance. It adjusts as perception changes. A shift in awareness can dissolve patterns that might otherwise persist for decades. Change in understanding alters the river's course, not by force, but by natural redirection of flow. This is why growth is never about correcting the past. It is about transforming perception in the present. The moment awareness recognizes a pattern, the future reshapes around that recognition. Cause and effect remain active, but their expression evolves with understanding. Karma also operates collectively. Groups, cultures, and generations carry shared patterns that influence individual experience. Social systems reflect accumulated choices and beliefs. Participation within these systems becomes another layer of learning, offering opportunities to recognize how personal awareness contributes to shared conditions. Responsibility within this framework is not about guilt, it is about agency. Understanding that perception shapes experience empowers attention to engage consciously rather than reactively. Life becomes less about enduring consequences and more about guiding development. Reincarnation ensures that learning remains continuous rather than compressed. Awareness is not rushed toward completion. It unfolds at a pace that allows integration. Growth becomes layered, allowing subtle shifts to accumulate into lasting transformation. This gradual unfolding protects against spiritual ambition. There is no finish line to reach, no final status to achieve. Learning is valued for its depth rather than its speed. Patience becomes natural when awareness recognizes itself as part of an ongoing movement rather than a single, isolated event. The river of conscious learning carries both calm stretches and turbulent currents. Some phases emphasize stability and consolidation. Others emphasize challenge and rapid change. Both are necessary. Stability integrates understanding. Challenge stimulates expansion. Periods of ease are not signs of stagnation. They allow insight to settle into behavior. Periods of difficulty are not signs of failure. They indicate that attention is being invited to refine perception under pressure. Because karma responds to perception. Suffering is not required for growth, but misunderstanding often creates it. When resistance meets experience, tension arises. When acceptance meets experience, clarity emerges. The same event can either reinforce limitation or dissolve it, depending on how awareness engages. This does not mean ignoring harm or injustice. It means responding with clarity rather than identification. Action, guided by understanding, changes both inner state and outer circumstance. Passivity is not spiritual maturity. Conscious engagement is. The river continues to move regardless of resistance. Awareness can fight its current or learn to navigate it. Navigation does not mean surrendering choice. It means aligning effort with direction of growth rather than opposing it through fear. As understanding deepens, karma shifts from corrective to expressive. Early phases emphasize balancing imbalance. Later phases emphasize sharing clarity through presence and contribution. Growth becomes less about resolving conflict and more about extending coherence into the world. At this stage, reincarnation becomes less about repetition and more about refinement. Awareness explores new expressions of harmony, creativity, and service. Experience becomes less reactive and more intentional, even while remaining unpredictable in form. This does not create detachment from life. It deepens engagement by removing fear of outcome. When awareness no longer clings to specific results, it participates more fully in each moment. Action becomes freer because it is no longer bound to self-protection. The river of learning does not carry awareness away from individuality. It allows individuality to evolve into clearer expression. Each lifetime refines how consciousness moves through personality, emotion, and relationship. Expression becomes less defensive and more authentic. Understanding karma also transforms how others are seen. Judgment softens when behavior is recognized as part of a learning process rather than a fixed identity. Compassion grows not as obligation, but as recognition of shared movement through similar challenges. This recognition does not excuse harm. It informs response. Boundaries remain necessary. Accountability remains meaningful. Yet these are guided by clarity rather than anger, by intention to restore balance rather than to dominate. As awareness matures, fear of death decreases. Continuity becomes intuitive rather than theoretical. Existence is no longer measured by duration of a single form, but by depth of participation across changing forms. The end of one expression becomes transition rather than loss. This perspective changes priorities. Attention shifts from accumulation to integration, from status to stability, from proving to expressing. Time becomes less urgent because learning is recognized as ongoing rather than scarce. The river continues, whether noticed or not. Awareness may resist its movement or cooperate with it. Cooperation does not mean passive drifting. It means learning to steer within flow, responding to currents with skill rather than struggle. When perception aligns with this movement, experience becomes less fragmented. Events connect into meaningful sequences. Even difficulty carries instruction rather than confusion. Life feels guided without feeling controlled. This guidance does not remove uncertainty. It changes how uncertainty is met. Instead of threat, it becomes space for growth. Instead of chaos, it becomes opportunity for alignment. Reincarnation, karma, and conscious learning together form a system of refinement rather than judgment. They support awareness as it learns to express itself with increasing clarity through changing conditions. They allow experience to remain rich without becoming overwhelming, continuous without becoming repetitive, structured without becoming rigid. Within this river, awareness is never abandoned. It carries itself forward, shaping and reshaping form as understanding deepens. Learning continues not as burden, but as natural movement of consciousness exploring its own capacity to perceive, respond, and create meaning within the ever-changing landscape of experience. Experience does not arrive from nowhere. It takes shape through perception, and perception is shaped by inner state. What appears outside is filtered through attention, belief, and expectation before it becomes meaning. In this way, the world does not simply happen to you, it responds to how awareness is organized within you. This does not mean that events are imagined, it means that interpretation determines impact, and impact determines direction. Two people can face the same situation and live entirely different realities because their inner lenses are different. One sees threat and tightens, the other sees challenge and adapts. The event remains the same, yet the experience diverges. Inner consciousness sets the tone of encounter. When attention is rooted in fear, the environment appears hostile. When attention is rooted in trust, the same environment reveals opportunity. This is not optimism. It is alignment between inner posture and outer response. Patterns become visible when awareness watches its own reactions. Repeated conflicts, repeated disappointments, repeated successes, all point toward internal tendencies seeking expression. The mirror does not judge, it reflects. It shows where energy is focused and where perception remains fixed. This reflection is not punishment, it is communication. Life communicates through feedback loops, adjusting circumstance in response to internal movement. When perception changes, the feedback changes. When interpretation shifts, response shifts. Over time, outer conditions reorganize around new patterns of attention. Blame interrupts this process. When responsibility is projected outward, learning slows because perception remains unexamined. Recognition restores movement, not by accepting fault, but by reclaiming agency over response and meaning. Agency does not imply control over every outcome. It implies influence over how experience is processed and integrated. Influence is enough to redirect long-term patterns. Small shifts in reaction accumulate into significant changes in trajectory. Emotional reactions provide immediate information about inner structure. Intense anger often signals boundaries that have not been clearly expressed. Persistent anxiety often signals attention locked in anticipation of loss. Chronic dissatisfaction often signals misalignment between action and deeper values. These signals are not weaknesses, they are indicators. They reveal where awareness is strained and where adjustment is possible. Suppressing them delays insight. Listening to them with clarity transforms them into guidance. The mirror also reflects strengths. Confidence attracts cooperation. Calm stabilizes chaos. Kindness opens unexpected doors. These responses are not accidental. They are expressions of resonance between inner state and social environment. Resonance operates continuously. Attention broadcasts its quality through tone, posture, timing, and choice. Others respond not only to words, but to underlying coherence or tension. Opportunities arise where alignment invites participation. This does not mean that every outcome can be predicted. It means that patterns become understandable when awareness observes its own participation. Life becomes dialogue rather than collision. Understanding this dialogue reduces the impulse to force change through control. Control focuses on rearranging external factors while leaving perception untouched. Influence focuses on refining inner alignment so that external conditions reorganize naturally around clearer intention. Refinement begins with noticing where attention tightens, noticing where reaction overrides choice, noticing where assumptions guide behavior. This noticing is not analysis, it is presence. Presence introduces space. Space allows choice. Choice changes pattern. Pattern changes experience. The sequence is simple, yet powerful when practiced consistently. The mirror also exposes unconscious beliefs. Beliefs about worth, safety, and belonging shape what feels possible. When these beliefs remain unexamined, they quietly filter opportunity. When they are seen, they can be revised. Revision does not require dramatic declaration. It occurs through consistent alignment between thought, feeling, and action. When behavior supports new understanding, perception adapts. Over time, expectation changes, and with it, response from the environment. This is why change often feels gradual. The mirror reflects accumulated shifts rather than single decisions. Patience becomes part of transformation, not as waiting, but as steady engagement with new habits of attention. The mirror principle does not deny randomness. It recognizes that within randomness, interpretation still shapes experience. Chaos exists, yet consciousness decides whether chaos becomes trauma or adaptation, whether uncertainty becomes paralysis or exploration. This does not romanticize difficulty. It clarifies where power remains available, even when circumstances cannot be controlled. Inner coherence remains accessible regardless of external volatility. When awareness stabilizes, reaction slows. Instead of immediate defense, observation appears. Instead of automatic judgment, curiosity arises. This shift alone changes how others respond. Because interaction is no longer driven by tension, communication becomes clearer. Boundaries become firmer without aggression. Requests become direct without manipulation. These changes reorganize relationship dynamics, not by demand, but by example. The mirror also operates internally. Thoughts reflect beliefs. Beliefs reflect identity. Identity reflects attachment. Observing this chain allows interruption of habitual cycles. When thought is seen as movement rather than command, it loses authority over behavior. Behavior then becomes guided by intention rather than impulse. Intention aligns with values rather than fear. Values anchor awareness in stability rather than fluctuation. This stability does not remove emotion. It contextualizes it. Emotion becomes wave rather than current. It is felt fully without steering the entire course of action. As this stability grows, experience becomes less reactive and more responsive. Events are met with flexibility rather than rigidity. Solutions appear where resistance once blocked perception. The mirror becomes clearer as perception clears. Instead of reflecting conflict, it reflects opportunity for refinement. Instead of reinforcing fear, it highlights areas ready for growth. This process deepens trust in internal guidance. Attention learns to rely less on external validation and more on coherence with inner signals. Decisions become quieter, less dramatic, yet more effective. Trust does not eliminate doubt. It reduces its authority. Doubt becomes information rather than obstacle. It is considered without being obeyed. When awareness rests in this trust, life feels less adversarial. Challenges remain, but they are approached as information rather than attack. Effort becomes purposeful rather than defensive. The mirror principle also encourages humility. It reveals that perception participates in creation of experience. This recognition dissolves superiority and victimhood alike. Responsibility replaces both. Responsibility here does not mean burden. It means capacity to respond with clarity. It restores dignity to choice, even when options are limited. As dignity strengthens, resentment weakens. Energy previously spent on resistance becomes available for creative response. Initiative returns. Engagement becomes active rather than reactive. The world continues to reflect inner organization. As attention stabilizes, reflections become gentler. As perception clarifies, feedback becomes more precise. Life becomes instructor rather than opponent. This does not create perfection. It creates participation. Awareness becomes collaborator with experience rather than subject to it. Movement continues, yet it is met with steadier presence. Through this collaboration, growth accelerates without force. Learning integrates without struggle. Change unfolds without collapse. The mirror remains active throughout this process, adjusting conditions in response to perception. It continues to reveal where attention is centered and where alignment can deepen. In this ongoing dialogue, experience becomes teacher and expression at once. Awareness learns through living, and living becomes expression of understanding. The boundary between inner and outer softens, not because distinction disappears, but because relationship becomes conscious. From this consciousness, engagement becomes intentional. Choice becomes grounded. Direction becomes coherent. Life continues with all its complexity, yet it is met from within rather than chased from without. The mirror does not disappear. It becomes companion, guiding attention toward ever clearer alignment between awareness and expression. In that alignment, experience unfolds with greater harmony, not because circumstances are controlled, but because perception remains stable within change, allowing response to remain free, flexible, and deeply present within the unfolding movement of life. When the body rests, awareness does not disappear. It changes direction, attention turns inward, and the senses release their hold on the outer world. In that quiet shift, another field becomes active, a field where images replace objects and feeling replaces logic. This is the domain of dreams, not as fantasy, but as a mode of perception where the soul communicates without the limits of language. Dreams do not speak in sentences. They speak in symbols, movement, and atmosphere. A door that will not open, a road that bends into fog, a voice that calls without a face. These are not random scenes. They are signals shaped by the same intelligence that organizes waking life, translated into a form the subconscious can receive. During waking hours, attention is busy sorting tasks, protecting identity, maintaining social roles. These functions are useful, but they also narrow perception. At night, those filters loosen. Awareness slips beneath surface control and enters the deeper currents of memory, instinct, and intuition. What could not be processed in daylight finds expression in symbolic form. Dreams often carry emotional truth before mental understanding catches up. Fear, relief, longing, and resolution appear first as images. Meaning follows later, sometimes hours or days afterward. When waking perception connects the emotional signal to lived experience, this is why trying to decode dreams only with logic often fails. Symbols shift depending on personal history, emotional state, and current challenges. The same image can mean protection for one person and restriction for another. What matters most is not the picture, but the feeling that accompanies it. Feeling is the language of the subconscious. It signals alignment or conflict, readiness or resistance. When awareness learns to listen to feeling without immediately labeling it, guidance becomes clearer. This listening continues into waking life through intuition. Intuition is not loud. It does not argue or persuade. It arrives as quiet certainty, a subtle pull, a sense of timing. It may appear as hesitation when logic says move forward, or as calm when circumstances suggest caution. It operates beneath rational explanation, yet its accuracy becomes visible over time through outcome. This does not make intuition infallible. It means it speaks from a deeper layer of processing, integrating subtle cues that conscious thought often ignores. Tone of voice, micro-expressions, environmental shifts, internal emotional signals, all converge into a single impression. The mind receives the conclusion without seeing the calculation. Learning to trust intuition does not mean abandoning reason. It means allowing both to inform decision. Reason evaluates options. Intuition signals alignment. When both agree, movement feels effortless. When they conflict, slowing down often reveals information that haste would miss. Dreams and intuition operate through the same channel. Direct communication between deeper awareness and conscious attention. One speaks in images during sleep. The other speaks in impressions during waking. Both require stillness to be heard clearly. Noise interferes with reception. Constant stimulation, emotional overload, and mental rehearsal drown subtle signals. This is why intuition strengthens when attention practices quiet observation. Whether through silence, slow breathing, or simple presence, stillness does not mean emptiness. It means receptivity. When attention stops chasing input, perception becomes sensitive to internal movement. Subtle shifts become noticeable. Guidance becomes recognizable. This sensitivity also reveals where fear disguises itself as intuition. Fear feels urgent. It pushes toward immediate action or avoidance. Intuition feels steady. It suggests without pressure. Learning to distinguish between these signals prevents reactive decisions disguised as insight. Dreams help clarify this distinction by revealing emotional patterns. Recurring dreams often point to unresolved themes, seeking integration. Repeated settings, repeated conflicts, repeated outcomes signal areas where awareness is stuck in familiar loops. When these loops are acknowledged in waking life, dream content often shifts. The subconscious updates its messaging once attention responds. This feedback relationship shows that dreams are not separate from daily awareness. They are continuous dialogue across different states of consciousness, keeping simple attention to dream impressions, even without full recall. Improves communication. A brief pause upon waking, noting mood or key imagery, signals to the subconscious that its messages are valued. Over time, recall strengthens naturally. This practice is not about control. It is about respect for internal guidance. When inner signals are acknowledged, they become clearer. When they are ignored, they repeat or intensify until attention responds. Intuition also strengthens through action. Small acts of trust build confidence in inner direction. When guidance is followed and results align, belief in the process deepens. When guidance is ignored and consequences follow, learning becomes undeniable. This learning does not require perfection. Mistakes refine discernment. Each experience teaches how intuition feels compared to impulse or fear. Over time, sensitivity increases. Dreams sometimes offer direct instruction. Solutions appear symbolically, presenting new approaches to familiar problems. The mind may not understand immediately, but behavior shifts when the underlying message integrates. Creative insight often arises from this same channel. Artists, inventors, and problem solvers frequently report solutions appearing during rest or distraction. When conscious effort relaxes, deeper processing completes unfinished patterns. This is not mysterious. It is how complex systems integrate information. When attention stops forcing outcome, internal organization completes its work. Dreams are the stage where this integration becomes visible. Intuition functions similarly during waking hours. When effort relaxes, clarity emerges. When attention listens rather than pushes, alignment becomes obvious. This does not eliminate responsibility. It redirects it toward awareness rather than control. Awareness becomes the primary skill, noticing internal response before external action. As this skill develops, decisions feel less conflicted. Even difficult choices carry a sense of internal coherence. Outcome may remain uncertain, but direction feels grounded. Dreams and intuition also connect awareness to collective patterns. Shared symbols, universal themes, and archetypal imagery appear across cultures and eras. These patterns reflect structures of human consciousness shaped by survival, emotion, and meaning. When such symbols appear in personal dreams, they connect individual experience to broader human themes. Isolation dissolves. Personal struggle becomes part of collective learning. This recognition fosters compassion. Challenges are no longer seen as personal failure, but as expressions of universal growth processes. Patience with self increases. Judgment softens. Intuition then extends beyond personal decision into empathy. Awareness senses emotional states of others, not through assumption, but through subtle cues. Listening deepens. Communication improves. This sensitivity does not require withdrawal from the world. It enhances engagement. Actions become more responsive, less defensive. Relationships stabilize when reactions are guided by awareness rather than habit. Dreams often prepare awareness for these relational shifts. Scenarios replay social dynamics, allowing emotional rehearsal without external consequence. Integration occurs internally before behavior changes externally. In this way, dreams function as emotional training grounds. They allow experimentation with response, processing unresolved interactions, and releasing outdated patterns. When awareness respects these processes, emotional maturity develops without forcing behavior or rules. Insight precedes discipline. Intuition then becomes a stabilizing force rather than a sporadic event. It guides pacing, rest, and engagement. It signals when to advance and when to pause. Life begins to feel rhythmic rather than chaotic. This rhythm does not remove challenge. It aligns challenge with readiness. Growth arrives when capacity is available. Overwhelm decreases because perception adjusts timing. Dreams and intuition together form gateways, not to escape reality, but to understand it more completely. They bridge conscious intention with subconscious intelligence, creating continuity across awareness states. When this continuity strengthens, identity becomes less rigid. Awareness recognizes itself beyond roles and narratives. Flexibility increases. Adaptation becomes natural. From this flexibility, creativity expands. New responses replace habitual reactions. Life becomes responsive rather than repetitive. The gateways remain open through simple practices. Rest, reflection, silence, and emotional honesty keep channels clear. Overstimulation, constant distraction, and unresolved tension distort signals. Choosing clarity becomes an act of respect for inner guidance. Respect invites cooperation from deeper awareness. Cooperation improves communication. Over time, the distinction between dream insight and waking intuition blurs. Both inform perception. Guidance becomes continuous rather than episodic. Awareness then navigates experience with greater coherence. Choices feel less forced. Direction becomes steady even when conditions fluctuate. The gateways do not lead away from life. They lead deeper into participation with it. Through dreams, awareness learns symbol. Through intuition, awareness learns timing. Together they align perception with unfolding reality. This alignment does not require belief. It develops through observation, trust, and repeated confirmation through lived experience. Evidence accumulates not as proof, but as familiarity. Familiarity builds confidence. Confidence stabilizes action. Action reinforces trust. The cycle strengthens itself. In this rhythm, awareness remains connected across waking and sleeping, thought and feeling, intention and response. Guidance flows without effort, not because control has increased, but because listening has deepened. Through these gateways, the soul does not shout for attention, it waits for stillness. When stillness appears, direction becomes visible, not as command, but as natural movement, steady and precise, guiding awareness forward with quiet certainty through the unfolding landscape of experience. Desire is not a flaw in human nature. It is movement. It is the current that pulls attention toward experience, growth, and expression. Yet desire is often misunderstood, treated as something to suppress or indulge without awareness. In truth, desire is a messenger. It reveals where awareness still feels incomplete and where integration is still unfolding. Every desire begins as an impulse toward a feeling, not an object. Safety, connection, freedom, recognition, peace. The mind translates that impulse into specific forms, believing fulfillment lies outside. When the form is reached and the feeling does not last, disappointment follows, and the cycle repeats. This does not mean desire failed. It means its message was misread. Desire points inward before it points outward. It signals a quality of consciousness seeking embodiment. When attention learns to recognize the feeling beneath the wanting, desire becomes guidance rather than compulsion. The problem begins when desire becomes fused with identity. When the mind says, "Without this, I am incomplete," desire turns into attachment. Attachment tightens attention, narrows perception, and amplifies fear of loss. What began as movement toward growth becomes resistance to uncertainty. This resistance creates the shadow. The shadow is not darkness in the moral sense. It is unrecognized energy. It consists of emotions, needs, and impulses that awareness has judged unacceptable and pushed out of conscious attention. Yet what is pushed away does not disappear. It moves into the background, influencing behavior indirectly. Unseen fear becomes control. Unacknowledged anger becomes resentment. Unmet need becomes dependency. The shadow does not sabotage growth. It seeks integration. It expresses itself through patterns that repeat until they are noticed. Desire often activates shadow because it touches unhealed areas. Wanting connection can reveal fear of abandonment. Wanting success can reveal fear of worthlessness. Wanting control can reveal fear of vulnerability. The shadow does not arise to punish. It arises to be included. Ignoring the shadow strengthens it. Fighting it intensifies it. Awareness dissolves it. This awareness does not mean acting on every impulse. It means recognizing what the impulse represents emotionally. Feeling does not require behavior. Recognition alone reduces compulsion. When desire is observed without immediate action, space opens between impulse and response. In that space, understanding emerges. The urge becomes information rather than command. Shadow begins to soften when attention says, "This emotion is allowed to exist, not indulged, not suppressed, simply acknowledged." Acceptance does not mean approval. It means honesty. This honesty restores balance. Energy that was split between repression and reaction becomes available for conscious choice. Desire transforms from hunger into direction. At this point, desire no longer demands fulfillment through external forms. It seeks expression through alignment with inner values. Wanting love becomes practicing presence. Wanting peace becomes cultivating stillness. Wanting recognition becomes expressing authenticity. Outer goals may still be pursued, but they are no longer expected to complete identity. They become expressions of wholeness rather than substitutes for it. This shift changes motivation. Action moves from lack to overflow. Effort becomes lighter because it is no longer driven by fear of inadequacy. Creativity increases because energy is no longer consumed by internal conflict. Shadow integration also changes how others are perceived. When inner conflict decreases, projection decreases. Traits once judged in others are recognized as aspects of self-seeking understanding. Compassion replaces comparison. This does not remove boundaries. It clarifies them. When awareness is not entangled in unrecognized need, boundaries become calm rather than defensive. Saying no becomes simple. Saying yes becomes intentional. Inner wholeness does not mean eliminating desire. It means relating to desire differently. Desire becomes an indicator of energy-seeking expression rather than proof of deficiency. Wholeness includes light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, certainty and doubt. Integration does not flatten experience. It enriches it by removing internal opposition. Resistance dissolves when awareness stops trying to be only one thing. When attention allows full range of emotion without defining identity by any single state, stability increases. This stability does not mean emotional numbness. It means emotional fluidity. Feelings move without stagnation. They inform rather than dominate. Shadow work, in this sense, is not digging into past trauma endlessly. It is recognizing present emotional reactions as signals pointing toward unmet needs or unexamined beliefs. Each reaction offers opportunity for clarity. When frustration arises, awareness asks, what expectation is being threatened? When jealousy arises, awareness asks what sense of lack is being activated. When avoidance arises, awareness asks what fear is being protected. These questions are not interrogation. They are invitations to listen. Listening shifts energy from reaction to reflection. Through this process, identity loosens its grip. Awareness stops defending rigid self-images. Flexibility returns. Growth becomes less threatening because it no longer feels like loss of control. As integration continues, desire aligns with purpose. Actions reflect inner coherence rather than external pressure. Life begins to feel less like pursuit and more like participation. Participation brings satisfaction that does not depend on constant achievement. Simple moments carry fullness. Presence itself becomes nourishing. This does not remove ambition. It refines it. Goals are pursued because they resonate, not because they compensate. Success becomes expression, not proof. Shadow also includes positive traits that were suppressed to gain acceptance. Confidence, assertiveness, creativity, and independence may hide behind fear of rejection. Integration brings these qualities back into expression. Wholeness is not softness alone. It includes strength, clarity, and decisive action when needed. Balanced awareness allows full range of response. As desire and shadow integrate, inner conflict quiets. Energy previously tied up in resistance becomes available for learning and contribution. Attention shifts outward not to escape self, but to engage meaningfully. Relationships improve because expectations decrease. Others are no longer asked to fill inner gaps. Connection becomes sharing rather than seeking. This sharing deepens intimacy. Authentic expression, invite authentic response. Masks fall naturally when they are no longer needed for protection. Wholeness does not eliminate challenge. It changes relationship to it. Difficulty becomes part of growth rather than threat to identity. Setbacks inform rather than define. Desire still arises. Shadow still appears. But neither dominates direction. Both are recognized as signals guiding attention toward deeper alignment. This alignment is not perfection. It is coherence between feeling, thought, and action. When these align, effort decreases and clarity increases. Inner wholeness does not arrive as dramatic revelation. It develops through consistent honesty, gentle attention, and willingness to feel without immediate reaction. Over time, this practice stabilizes awareness. Identity becomes flexible. Self-respect grows from understanding rather than performance. From this foundation, life unfolds with less inner friction. Decisions feel grounded. Relationships feel sincere. Creativity flows without constant self-doubt. Desire transforms into inspiration. Shadow transforms into wisdom. Both serve growth when recognized. The path back to inner wholeness is not a return to some earlier state. It is integration of all that has been experienced. Nothing is rejected. Nothing is erased. Everything is understood and included. In this inclusion, awareness settles into quiet confidence, not because nothing is wanted, but because wanting no longer defines worth. Presence becomes home. From that home, movement continues, not driven by hunger, but guided by clarity. Desire becomes direction. Shadow becomes depth. Wholeness becomes the natural condition from which life expresses itself with steady, grounded ease. Creation does not begin with action. It begins with image and meaning, before behavior shifts. Perception shifts. Before perception shifts, imagination prepares the pattern that attention will follow. Imagination is not fantasy. It is the organizing force that shapes how reality is interpreted and expressed. Every plan, fear, hope, and expectation starts as an inner picture. That picture guides attention towards certain possibilities while ignoring others. What is repeatedly imagined becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar feels possible. In this way, imagination quietly selects the future by shaping what the mind is willing to recognize. Words give structure to imagination. They label experience, assign value, and define boundaries. A word is not just a sound. It carries meaning, emotion, and expectation. Repeated words become repeated instructions to the subconscious about what to expect and how to respond. This is the law of resonance in practice. Inner patterns attract outer conditions that match their tone, not through magic, but through alignment of perception, behavior, and opportunity. When attention expects rejection, it notices distance. When attention expects support, it notices cooperation. Behavior follows expectation, and response follows behavior. Resonance operates at the level of interpretation first. Two people can hear the same sentence and receive different messages. One hears threat, the other hears challenge. Their reactions shape outcomes that confirm their inner state. Words spoken inwardly are as influential as words spoken aloud. Internal dialogue sets emotional climate. Climate influences motivation. Motivation shapes action. Action invite response. The sequence is continuous and largely invisible unless awareness observes its own habits of thought. Imagination fuels this sequence by providing emotional rehearsal. When a situation is imagined repeatedly, the nervous system begins to respond as if it were real. This primes reaction, posture, and tone long before any external event occurs. This is why worry often feels exhausting even when nothing has happened. The body experiences imagined threat as present. Likewise, positive expectation can generate calm and confidence even before conditions change. Imagination does not distinguish between what is occurring and what is anticipated. It responds to emotional intensity. Whatever is given, sustained feeling becomes a template for response. Words reinforce these templates. Statements repeated with conviction shape belief. Belief shapes attention. Attention shapes experience. This does not mean that repeating phrases guarantees specific outcomes. It means that consistent internal messaging adjusts perception and behavior in ways that influence probability. Possibility becomes accessible when attention is prepared to see and act on it. Language also shapes identity. Saying, "I am tired," "I am unlucky," "I am not good at this," binds momentary states into permanent self-concepts. These concepts then filter future experience, making change appear more difficult than it is. Shifting language does not require denying reality. It requires describing reality in ways that leave room for growth. Saying this is difficult allows movement. Saying this is impossible closes it. Imagination expands what language permits. When awareness holds images of capability, adaptation becomes easier. When awareness holds images of limitation, effort collapses before it begins. Resonance responds to emotional coherence, not to words alone. Saying confident statements while feeling doubt creates mixed signals. The subconscious follows feeling. This is why change requires alignment between thought and emotion, not just verbal affirmation. Alignment develops through repetition combined with experience. Small actions that support new self-image gradually build emotional credibility. Imagination then shifts from hope to expectation. Expectation does not mean certainty of outcome. It means openness to possibility. Openness increases awareness of opportunity. Opportunity increases likelihood of meaningful response. Words spoken to others also influence resonance. Communication carries tone beyond content. Encouragement invites effort. Dismissal reduces engagement. Respect fosters cooperation. Contempt provokes defense. Social reality is built through shared language. Narratives about what is normal, valuable, and achievable shape collective behavior. These narratives influence individual choices even when unnoticed. Changing personal narrative can influence social interaction by altering participation. When confidence increases, posture changes. When posture changes, response changes. The mirror principle applies here as well. Imagination can rehearse failure or rehearse success. Both feel real to the nervous system. One prepares avoidance. The other prepares engagement. Neither guarantees outcome, but one increases readiness to respond constructively. Constructive response often determines whether opportunity becomes result. Many chances are missed not because they did not exist, but because perception was not prepared to recognize or act on them. This is why imagination is foundational to creation. It sets the range of responses awareness can access under pressure. It determines whether reaction defaults to fear or flexibility. Words shape imagination by directing attention. Attention shapes emotion by amplifying focus. Emotion shapes behavior by energizing action. Behavior shapes environment by altering interaction. The cycle continues. Breaking negative cycles requires interrupting internal language that reinforces limitation. This interruption must be gentle and consistent. Aggressive self-correction creates resistance. Compassionate redirection builds trust. Redirecting imagination toward constructive images does not deny difficulty. It frames difficulty as temporary and workable. This framing preserves energy needed for adaptation. Resonance then shifts gradually. Emotional tone becomes steadier. Expectation becomes less defensive. Opportunities appear more visible because attention is no longer locked in vigilance. Creation in this sense is not about forcing outcomes. It is about shaping internal readiness so that when opportunities arise, response is aligned with intention rather than fear. Words used in self-description play a critical role here. Saying learning instead of failing, adjusting instead of stuck, exploring instead of lost, shifts perception without distorting reality. These shifts influence persistence. Persistence increases skill. Skill increases confidence. Confidence increases engagement. Engagement increases probability of success. The law of resonance does not bypass effort. It directs effort more effectively by aligning motivation with perception. Imagination also supports healing. Visualizing calm regulates nervous response. Imagining safety reduces stress signals. The body responds to these images as if protection were present, allowing recovery processes to activate. This does not replace medical care or practical action. It supports them by stabilizing emotional state, which influences immune response, sleep quality, and decision-making. Words of reassurance spoken inwardly create internal environment where recovery feels possible. Feeling possible influences compliance with helpful behavior. Resonance operates subtly, adjusting probability rather than guaranteeing result. It shifts odds through alignment rather than command. Understanding this removes magical thinking while preserving empowerment. Awareness influences experience not by controlling external forces, but by shaping internal readiness and behavioral response. Creation then becomes collaboration between inner state and outer condition. Neither operates alone. Both shape outcome through interaction. Imagination provides direction. Words provide structure. Resonance provides feedback. When these align, experience unfolds with less friction, not because challenges vanish, but because response becomes adaptive rather than rigid. This adaptability is the true creative power. It allows awareness to meet changing conditions with flexible intelligence rather than fixed expectation. Over time, imagination becomes disciplined not through restriction, but through clarity of intention. Attention chooses images that support growth rather than replaying fear. Language becomes supportive rather than accusatory. Internal dialogue becomes guiding rather than critical. This shift does not require constant vigilance. It develops through habit. Habit reshapes default response. Default response shapes experience. Creation continues moment by moment through this interaction. Every thought, word, and image contributes to tone of engagement. When awareness becomes conscious of this process, participation becomes intentional. Attention chooses resonance rather than being carried by it. From that intention, experience reorganizes gradually. Patterns shift. Outcomes improve, not through force, but through coherence between inner state and outer action. Imagination opens possibility. Words anchor it. Resonance integrates it into lived experience. Together, they form the subtle mechanics of creation, not as mystical decree, but as practical relationship between perception, emotion, behavior, and response. Within this relationship, awareness learns that change begins before it is seen, in the quiet shaping of expectation and meaning that guides every step taken in the visible world. Movement dominates modern attention. Tasks, messages, plans, and reactions pull awareness outward in continuous sequence. In this momentum, direction is often confused with speed, yet clarity does not arise from acceleration. It arises from stillness, the quiet state where attention is no longer pushed by urgency and can listen beneath surface noise. Stillness is not inactivity. It is the absence of internal resistance. It is the moment when attention rests instead of grasps, observes instead of reacts. In this resting, perception becomes sensitive. Subtle signals that were drowned out by constant motion become audible. Presence grows out of this sensitivity. Presence is attention anchored in the current moment rather than scattered across memory and anticipation. When awareness remains with what is happening now, perception becomes accurate. Emotion becomes information rather than command. Thought becomes tool rather than master. This accuracy is the foundation of inner guidance. Inner guidance does not arrive as dramatic instruction. It appears as simple knowing, a quiet alignment between perception and action. It does not argue. It does not threaten. It suggests. Stillness makes this suggestion visible. Without stillness, attention remains occupied with internal dialogue, rehearsing problems and defending identity. Guidance is present, but it cannot be distinguished from mental noise. When awareness slows, a different quality of knowing appears. It feels grounded, unforced, and stable. It does not promise comfort. It offers direction. Presence stabilizes emotion. Instead of being carried by reaction, attention observes sensation as it moves. This observation changes relationship to feeling. Anxiety becomes energy. Sadness becomes release. Anger becomes signal. None require immediate behavior. With this space, response becomes intentional. Intention aligns with values rather than impulse. Action becomes deliberate rather than defensive. Stillness does not eliminate complexity. It simplifies relationship to complexity. Problems are seen as sequences rather than threats. Solutions become clearer when attention is not compressed by fear. Fear accelerates thinking. It narrows focus to immediate protection. Stillness widens focus, allowing consideration of long-term consequence and subtle influence. This wider field supports wiser decision. Presence also dissolves unnecessary struggle. Much effort is spent resisting what is already happening. Resistance consumes energy without changing reality. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means acknowledging conditions before choosing response. Acknowledgement stabilizes perception. From stability, action becomes effective. Inner guidance relies on this stability. It functions through intuition, timing, and subtle impulse. When attention is tense, these signals are misinterpreted as anxiety or dismissed entirely. Learning to trust guidance requires repeated experience of following it and observing outcome. Trust grows not from belief, but from recognition of pattern. Stillness strengthens this recognition by making cause and effect visible. When reaction slows, awareness sees how choices influence results. This feedback refines discernment. Discernment is different from caution. Caution hesitates out of fear. Discernment pauses out of clarity. One contracts. The other evaluates. Presence supports discernment by keeping attention in direct contact with experience rather than lost in projection. Projection imagines future harm or reward. Presence perceives current conditions. Current conditions contain all necessary information for next step, not for entire journey, but for immediate movement. Guidance rarely reveals distant outcomes. It reveals appropriate response now. This prevents overwhelm. Instead of carrying imagined futures, attention focuses on present alignment. Each aligned step simplifies the next. Stillness also reconnects awareness to bodily intelligence. The body registers coherence and conflict through sensation. Tightness, ease, fatigue, and vitality all communicate information about alignment. Listening to these signals improves decision-making. Choices that appear reasonable mentally may feel draining physically. Choices that feel challenging mentally may feel energizing physically. Presence allows both to be considered. Inner guidance integrates mental potential, emotional, and physical signals into unified direction. This integration is not achieved through analysis alone. It emerges through quiet attention to experience as it unfolds. Silence supports this process, not absence of sound, but absence of internal commentary. Moments of silence reset attention, allowing perception to recalibrate. These moments do not require special settings. They appear in pauses between activities, in simple breathing, in attentive listening. Stillness can exist within movement when attention remains receptive. As stillness becomes familiar, response becomes more fluid. Instead of rigid plans, action adjusts dynamically to changing conditions. Flexibility increases because awareness is not clinging to fixed outcomes. Clinging creates strain. Strain distorts perception. Distorted perception produces ineffective action. Stillness interrupts this chain. Presence also improves relationship with uncertainty. Instead of demanding certainty before moving, awareness accepts partial information and proceeds with adaptability. Confidence shifts from predicting outcome to trusting response. This trust is not blind. It is built through repeated successful navigation of uncertainty. Each experience of adapting effectively reinforces belief in internal capacity. Inner guidance strengthens as confidence in responsiveness grows. Attention no longer seeks constant reassurance. It engages directly with circumstance. Stillness also reveals when action is unnecessary. Many conflicts escalate because attention feels compelled to respond immediately. Pausing prevents escalation. Silence often dissolves tension without intervention. Knowing when not to act is as important as knowing when to act. Guidance includes restraint as well as initiative. Presence clarifies motivation. It reveals whether action arises from fear or from alignment. Fear-driven action seeks control. Alignment-driven action seeks expression. Expression feels different. It is purposeful without urgency. It persists without forcing. It adapts without collapse. Over time, living from presence shifts identity. Self-worth becomes less tied to performance and more to integrity of response. Integrity means acting in accordance with inner clarity even when outcome is uncertain. This integrity stabilizes emotion. Satisfaction arises from coherence rather than approval. Confidence becomes quieter and more durable. Stillness also deepens compassion. When attention is not consumed by personal narrative, awareness becomes available to others. Listening improves. Empathy becomes natural rather than effortful. This does not require self-sacrifice. It requires clarity of boundary and intention. Presence supports both. Inner guidance then extends into relationship. Timing improves. Words become more precise. Conflict is addressed without unnecessary escalation. Cooperation becomes more likely. Stillness does not isolate. It enhances connection by removing reactive interference. As this practice stabilizes, guidance becomes continuous rather than occasional. Attention remains receptive even while engaged in activity. Decision-making becomes intuitive rather than strained. This does not remove challenge. It removes confusion about how to meet challenge. When stillness anchors awareness, stress becomes signal rather than identity. Fatigue becomes message rather than failure. These signals guide pacing and priority. Guidance then supports sustainable action. Burnout decreases because effort aligns with capacity. Rest becomes strategic rather than escape. Presence also refines creativity. Insight arises when attention is relaxed and receptive. Solutions appear when pressure releases. Stillness allows subconscious integration to surface into awareness. Many breakthroughs occur not during effort, but during pause. This is not coincidence. It reflects how complex systems resolve when interference stops. Inner guidance speaks in these openings. Cultivating stillness does not require retreat from life. It requires brief, regular returns to awareness of breath, sensation, and immediate experience. These returns recalibrate perception throughout the day. Each recalibration strengthens access to guidance. Over time, attention learns to settle quickly. Stability becomes portable. This portability is essential because guidance must operate within action, not apart from it. Stillness within movement is the goal, not constant withdrawal. When stillness and presence integrate into daily life, direction becomes clearer without effort. Decisions feel grounded. Timing improves. Confidence steadies. Life remains unpredictable, yet response becomes reliable. Awareness trusts its capacity to meet what arises. This trust changes relationship to the future. Instead of anxiety about what may happen, attention focuses on how it will respond. Control is replaced by competence. Competence grows through experience, guided by presence. Inner guidance does not promise comfort. It promises coherence. It aligns action with deeper understanding rather than immediate gratification. Following it may lead through difficulty. Yet even difficulty carries sense of rightness when aligned with growth. Stillness reveals this alignment. Presence sustains it. Guidance directs it. Together, they form a stable center within changing conditions. From this center, awareness moves through life with steadiness, responding to complexity with clarity, adapting to change with confidence, and expressing understanding through action that feels grounded, intentional, and quietly strong within the ongoing movement of experience. Suffering enters experience when resistance meets reality, not because pain is chosen, but because awareness struggles against what is already present. This struggle tightens perception, amplifies emotion, and turns challenge into prolonged distress. Pain may arrive through loss, failure, illness, or betrayal. Suffering begins when the mind insists that what is happening should not be happening. This does not mean pain is imaginary. It means the depth and duration of suffering are shaped by relationship to pain. When awareness can feel without fighting, pain remains a sensation. When awareness fights sensation, pain becomes story, and story becomes identity. Suffering then becomes personal. It feels targeted, unfair, isolating. Attention turns inward, not in reflection, but in defense. Energy contracts. Options seem to disappear. The future narrows into repetition of the present. Yet within this contraction, transformation begins. Suffering strips away distraction. When comfort and routine dissolve, awareness is forced into direct contact with experience. There is no escape into habit, no hiding behind role. What remains is raw encounter with feeling and meaning. This encounter is uncomfortable, yet it is honest. It reveals what has been avoided, suppressed, or postponed. Questions that were ignored become unavoidable. Values that were assumed become tested. Solitude often accompanies this phase. Not always physical isolation, but emotional separation. Others may not understand what is happening inside. Words fail. Advice feels shallow. Attention turns inward. Not by choice, but by necessity. This solitude is not abandonment. It is concentration. Concentration gathers energy. When external engagement quiets, inner movement becomes visible. Patterns surface. Long-standing fears speak clearly. Old grief releases its grip. Identity begins to loosen as certainty dissolves. This loosening feels like disorientation. Familiar strategies no longer work. Old ambitions lose meaning. Social approval feels irrelevant. Attention enters unknown territory without clear map. This is the fire of transformation. Fire does not destroy essence. It consumes what cannot remain. It removes structures built from fear, habit, and imitation. What survives is what is true. In this fire, false identities fall away. Roles that once defined worth lose authority. Expectations inherited from others lose power. What remains is a quieter sense of self. Less certain, but more real. This phase is not gentle. It challenges attachment to control. It exposes dependency on approval. It reveals vulnerability without immediate solution. Awareness must learn to stand without external validation. Standing here builds inner authority. Inner authority does not mean dominance. It means self-trust. It means recognizing that response can be chosen even when circumstances cannot. It means allowing emotion without being ruled by it. As this authority strengthens, suffering begins to shift into learning. Pain still exists, but it is no longer interpreted as evidence of failure. It becomes information about what needs to change. Grief becomes acknowledgement of love rather than proof of loss. Fear becomes signal for courage rather than reason to retreat. Loneliness becomes invitation to meet self rather than confirmation of rejection. This reframing does not happen instantly. It develops through endurance and reflection. Awareness learns that it can survive discomfort without losing itself. This knowledge changes everything. Once awareness knows it can endure, fear loses its grip. Fear may still arise, but it no longer dictates direction. Movement becomes possible even while emotion remains present. This is transformation in motion. Solitude supports this motion by removing external influence during vulnerable stages. Without constant input, awareness recalibrates. It reconnects with internal rhythm. It begins to hear inner guidance more clearly. This clarity often arrives quietly, not as dramatic revelation, but as subtle shift in attitude, a willingness to release what cannot be controlled, a readiness to accept what must be faced, a decision to act differently. These small decisions accumulate into new identity, not identity built from defense, but from coherence between feeling and action. Transformation also changes relationship to time. Urgency fades. There is no rush to return to normal. Normal no longer fits. Attention moves patiently, trusting that clarity will emerge through experience rather than prediction. During this phase, progress may look invisible, yet deep restructuring is taking place beneath surface behavior. Beliefs are being revised. Expectations are being reset. Motivation is being purified. Purified not of ambition, but of desperation. Desperation seeks escape from discomfort. Purified motivation seeks growth through it. When this shift occurs, suffering loses its absolute authority. It becomes one part of a larger process. It no longer defines identity. It becomes chapter rather than whole story. This perspective restores choice. Awareness may not choose circumstances, but it chooses meaning. Meaning determines direction. Choosing meaning does not mean inventing positive interpretation prematurely. It means staying open to understanding that has not yet arrived. It means allowing experience to teach rather than judging it before lesson appears. This openness keeps attention flexible. Flexibility allows adaptation. Adaptation supports survival and growth. Transformation often becomes visible after the most difficult phase has passed. Looking back, connections appear. Loss reveals redirection. Failure reveals necessary skill. Betrayal reveals strength and boundary. These insights cannot be rushed. They mature through lived experience, not intellectual analysis. Solitude gradually gives way to reconnection, not return to old roles, but entrance into new relationships formed from clearer identity. Interaction becomes more authentic. Dependence decreases. Mutual respect increases. This does not mean isolation ends forever. Solitude becomes tool rather than condition. Awareness learns when to withdraw for reflection and when to engage for expression. The fire of transformation leaves behind resilience, not hardened indifference, but flexible strength. Sensitivity remains, but it is balanced by stability. This balance changes how future challenges are met. Crisis no longer feels like annihilation. It feels like signal for adjustment. Confidence grows not from certainty of outcome, but from certainty of capacity to respond. Capacity is the true gift of transformation. Through suffering, awareness discovers depth. Through solitude, awareness discovers self. Through fire, awareness discovers clarity. None of these are sought intentionally, yet when they arrive, they offer opportunity that comfort cannot provide. Comfort stabilizes. Difficulty evolves. Transformation does not erase past pain. It integrates it. Experience becomes wisdom rather than wound. This integration softens judgment of self and others. Everyone is seen as moving through their own fire, often without recognition of its purpose. Compassion becomes natural when struggle is understood as catalyst rather than failure. From this compassion, new purpose emerges. Purpose not based on proving worth, but on expressing understanding. Contribution becomes natural extension of growth. Expression may take many forms: creativity, service, leadership, mentorship. All are ways awareness shares what it has learned through transformation. This sharing does not require perfection. It requires honesty. Others do not need flawless guides. They need examples of resilience and clarity in motion. Thus, suffering becomes teacher. Solitude becomes laboratory. Fire becomes sculptor. What emerges is not the old self repaired, but a new configuration of awareness, more stable, more flexible, and more aligned with inner truth. This new state does not prevent future pain. It changes how pain is met. It is met with presence rather than panic, with inquiry rather than accusation. Transformation then becomes ongoing rather than exceptional. Awareness recognizes growth as continuous, not reserved for crisis. Yet the deepest shifts often follow the deepest trials. When identity is challenged, awareness is forced to evolve. This evolution is not punishment, it is expansion. In this expansion, life becomes less about avoiding suffering and more about engaging meaning. Challenges are no longer feared as enemies. They are approached as tests of coherence. Through this coherence, action becomes purposeful. Through purpose, endurance becomes meaningful. Through meaning, suffering transforms into strength. And through strength, awareness stands ready for the next movement of growth, not hardened by past fire, but illuminated by it, carrying forward clarity that can only be forged through experience, steady and grounded, within the unfolding journey of transformation. Healing begins when attention shifts from protection to connection. Protection tightens awareness around past injury and future threat. Connection opens awareness to present relationship with self, others, and life itself. The heart is the center of this opening, not as emotion alone, but as capacity to remain present with experience without closing. When the heart is guarded, perception becomes selective. It scans for danger, remembers pain, and prepares defense. This vigilance feels necessary, yet it keeps awareness locked in reaction. Healing requires a different posture, one that does not deny past harm, but refuses to let past harm dictate future response. Gratitude supports this shift. Gratitude is not pretending that everything is fine. It is recognizing what is real and supportive even while difficulty exists. It redirects, leaving from what is missing to what is present. This redirection changes emotional tone, which changes physiological state, which changes perception. The body responds to appreciation with relaxation. Breathing deepens, muscles soften, nervous system activity stabilizes. In this state, the mind becomes less defensive and more receptive. Learning and recovery become easier when the system is not braced against imagined threat. Gratitude does not erase pain. It widens awareness so pain is not the only signal being received. Alongside hurt, there is also breath, warmth, support, memory, and possibility. When awareness holds multiple signals at once, intensity decreases and clarity increases. Forgiveness works through a similar widening. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as excusing harm or denying responsibility. It is neither. It is releasing the ongoing identification with injury. It is refusing to let another person's action remain the organizing center of emotional life. Holding resentment feels like strength, yet it binds awareness to the past. The body remains in defensive posture. Stress hormones continue to circulate. The event remains active internally long after it has ended externally. Forgiveness interrupts this loop. It does not require reconciliation. It requires decision to stop carrying what no longer serves growth. It means choosing not to let past pain define present identity. This choice frees energy. Energy previously spent on guarding, replaying, and justifying becomes available for healing and creativity. Emotional bandwidth increases. Attention returns to what can be shaped now. Forgiveness is not an event. It is a process. Feelings may persist even after decision is made. This does not mean forgiveness failed. It means emotional patterns take time to release. Repetition of intention gradually weakens old attachments. Gratitude and forgiveness together stabilize the heart. The heart here is not sentiment. It is capacity for openness. It allows awareness to experience fully without becoming trapped in reaction. It supports vulnerability without collapse. This vulnerability is strength. It allows learning from experience rather than withdrawal from it. It keeps perception flexible. Healing frequencies describe emotional states that support integration rather than fragmentation. Gratitude and forgiveness generate such states by reducing internal conflict and increasing coherence between thought, feeling, and intention. Coherence supports health. When internal systems cooperate, recovery accelerates, sleep improves, digestion stabilizes, immune response strengthens. These are not spiritual claims alone. They reflect how stress physiology responds to emotional regulation. Gratitude signals safety. Forgiveness signals release. Together, they tell the nervous system that vigilance is no longer required. Rest becomes possible. Repair becomes active. Healing then becomes less about fixing and more about allowing natural processes to complete. The heart also influences relationship. When resentment decreases, communication softens, listening improves. Misunderstanding becomes easier to clarify, even when boundaries are necessary. They are expressed without hostility. This reduces conflict cycles that reinforce emotional strain. Gratitude within relationship highlights what is working rather than focusing exclusively on what is not. This does not ignore problems. It balances perspective so that correction does not replace appreciation. People respond differently when they feel valued rather than judged. Cooperation increases. Tension decreases. Solutions become more accessible. Forgiveness within relationship removes demand for emotional payment. It stops waiting for apology or change before releasing pain. This does not remove accountability. It removes emotional dependency on outcome. Emotional independence strengthens personal stability. Stability supports clearer decision-making. Healing also involves forgiveness towards self. Self-judgment often persists long after external criticism has ended. Mistakes become identity. Regret becomes narrative. This internal attack perpetuates stress and inhibits growth. Self-forgiveness interrupts this attack. It does not deny responsibility. It acknowledges learning. It recognizes that awareness evolves through trial and error. It allows movement forward without dragging past failure into present action. This release improves motivation. When shame decreases, effort increases. When fear of failure weakens, experimentation becomes possible. Growth accelerates when identity is not threatened by imperfection. Gratitude towards self also matters. Recognizing effort, resilience, and progress stabilizes confidence. It counters the tendency to focus only on what remains undone. Balanced assessment supports sustainable development. Healing frequencies do not create artificial positivity. They create emotional conditions that allow truth to be faced without collapse. They support honest engagement rather than avoidance. This honesty is essential for transformation. When awareness feels safe, it can examine pain without being overwhelmed. Trauma can be processed. Loss can be integrated. Memory can be held without defining identity. Safety arises from internal signals of acceptance. Gratitude and forgiveness generate these signals. They communicate that awareness is no longer under attack from within. From this internal safety, external engagement becomes less reactive. Boundaries become clear. Needs are expressed directly. Negotiation becomes possible. Healing then extends outward into behavior and relationship. The heart also influences meaning. When attention remains locked in grievance, meaning contracts to survival. When gratitude and forgiveness expand awareness, meaning expands to growth and contribution. Contribution becomes possible when energy is no longer consumed by defense. Helping others becomes natural extension of stability rather than attempt to prove worth. This does not require grand action. Small acts of kindness and presence shift emotional climate. These shifts ripple outward through social networks, improving collective tone. Healing thus becomes communal, not only personal. When individuals release resentment and cultivate gratitude, social interaction becomes less adversarial. Trust increases. Collaboration improves. Conflict becomes less destructive. This collective impact reinforces personal healing by providing supportive environment. The heart also stabilizes intuition. Emotional turbulence distorts inner signals. Calm receptivity improves sensitivity. When gratitude and forgiveness quiet emotional noise, guidance becomes easier to recognize. Decisions align more closely with values. Timing improves. Impulse decreases. This alignment reduces regret and increases satisfaction. Healing is not constant comfort. It is capacity to remain open through discomfort. Gratitude and forgiveness do not prevent pain. They prevent pain from hardening into identity. This distinction matters. Pain is temporary. Identity shapes future. When identity is no longer defined by injury, life becomes exploratory rather than defensive. Curiosity replaces caution. Growth replaces stagnation. This does not remove need for protection when appropriate. It refines it. Boundaries become specific rather than generalized. Caution becomes situational rather than constant. The heart remains open while discernment remains active. Healing frequencies do not weaken strength. They direct strength toward coherence rather than resistance. Resistance consumes energy. Coherence conserves it. Conserved energy supports creativity, learning, and endurance. Endurance then supports long-term development rather than short-term survival. Gratitude and forgiveness also deepen patience. When awareness is not chasing validation or revenge, it tolerates gradual progress. Expectations soften. Pressure decreases. Process becomes more enjoyable. Enjoyment supports persistence. Persistence supports mastery. Mastery supports confidence. This chain builds sustainable growth. Healing then becomes continuous practice rather than singular achievement. Each day offers moments to release tension and recognize support. Each moment strengthens emotional stability. Over time, these moments discourage chronic stress patterns. Baseline mood improves. Resilience increases. The heart becomes stable center of experience rather than reactive sensor. From this center, awareness engages life with clarity and warmth. Challenges are met with steadiness. Success is met with humility. Failure is met with learning. Healing does not mean becoming unaffected. It means becoming responsive without being trapped. Gratitude and forgiveness keep attention oriented toward connection rather than separation. They dissolve illusion of isolation that intensifies suffering. Connection does not mean dependence. It means recognition of shared process of growth. This recognition nurtures compassion for self and others. Compassion does not excuse harm. It contextualizes it within learning rather than fixed identity. From compassion, action becomes corrective rather than punitive. Correction restores balance. Punishment perpetuates conflict. Healing frequencies thus guide behavior toward restoration rather than retaliation. Restoration supports stability. Stability supports growth. Through the heart, awareness learns to relate to experience with openness rather than defense. Through gratitude, awareness recognizes support rather than scarcity. Through forgiveness, awareness releases attachment to past injury. Together, these states transform internal climate. In that climate, healing becomes natural outcome rather than forced effort. The body repairs, the mind clarifies, relationships soften, purpose strengthens. Life continues with its uncertainties and challenges, yet it is met from a place of coherence rather than conflict. This coherence does not guarantee ease. It guarantees capacity to engage meaningfully. From that capacity, growth unfolds steadily, guided not by fear of pain, but by trust in resilience and connection, allowing awareness to move forward with heart open, perception clear, and energy available for expression and healing within the ongoing movement of experience. Death appears final to the senses, yet awareness has always known itself beyond what the senses can measure. Form changes, presence remains. What ends is structure, not consciousness. What dissolves is organization, not awareness itself. This distinction transforms how death is understood. The body is a vehicle. It carries perception through physical experience, subject to time and decay. When its function completes, attention withdraws from sensory input. What remains is the same awareness that observed sensation, emotion, and thought during life. Fear of death arises from identification with form. When identity is tied to body and role, loss of form feels like loss of self. Yet even during life, awareness is not identical to physical condition. Thought changes, emotion changes, personality evolves. Through all of this, something remains constant, quietly witnessing each shift. This witness does not vanish when the body ceases. Continuity of consciousness is not memory of events, it is continuity of being. It is the same presence that moved through childhood, adulthood, joy, and sorrow, now moving through transition rather than sensation. This does not deny grief. Grief belongs to those who remain within form, still engaged in relationship and attachment. Grief honors connection. It does not contradict continuity. It reflects the pain of separation within physical perception. Understanding continuity does not remove sadness. It removes terror. Terror comes from imagining extinction. Continuity reframes death as change of state rather than annihilation. Attention shifts from fear of nothingness to acceptance of unknown. Unknown does not mean empty. It means unmeasured by physical tools. Near-death experiences, moments of deep meditation, and profound states of surrender often share similar descriptions: expansion, peace, absence of bodily boundaries, and sense of light or clarity. These experiences suggest that awareness can function without physical anchors. Light beyond form is not literal brightness. It is clarity of being. Absence of obstruction. It is awareness without resistance, without effort to maintain identity. During physical life, awareness is filtered through nervous system, language, and personal history, beyond form. These filters dissolve. What remains is direct presence, free of individual storyline. This does not mean individuality disappears instantly. Tendencies, emotional patterns, and learned structures may persist as transitional layers. Yet over time, awareness releases attachment to personal narrative, returning to wider field of being. This return does not erase experience. It integrates it. Learning remains as capacity, not as memory sequence. From this perspective, death is not exit from life. It is exit from one mode of perception. Awareness continues learning through other forms of experience, whether within subtle realms or through renewed physical expression. This continuity explains why fear of death often diminishes with spiritual maturity, not because mortality becomes desirable, but because identity shifts from form to awareness. What is essential no longer feels threatened by physical change. When awareness rests in this understanding, life is lived differently. Attachment softens, appreciation deepens, urgency lessens. Moments are valued not because they are scarce, but because they are meaningful expressions of ongoing presence. This does not encourage detachment from relationships. It encourages fuller presence within them. Knowing that form is temporary intensifies attention to connection rather than diminishing it. Love becomes less about possession and more about recognition. Connection is experienced as meeting of awareness through changing forms, not ownership of another's existence. This view also transforms how loss is integrated. Pain remains, yet it is held within broader context of continuity. Farewell becomes transition rather than absolute separation. Memory becomes bridge rather than substitute. The light beyond form also reframes purpose of life. Life is no longer seen as test with final verdict. It is seen as classroom of experience, where learning contributes to ongoing evolution of awareness. Mistakes lose their finality. Growth continues beyond visible outcome. What was unresolved becomes opportunity rather than regret. This understanding removes harsh judgment of self and others. Behavior is seen as expression of current awareness rather than fixed character. Accountability remains, but condemnation dissolves. Death also reveals impermanence of all external structures. Wealth, status, and reputation dissolve at the same boundary. What remains is quality of awareness, depth of understanding, and capacity for connection. This realization clarifies priorities. Energy shifts from accumulation to integration, from proving worth to expressing coherence. Integration becomes measure of progress, not external achievement. The light beyond form represents this integrated awareness, free from fragmentation. It is not reward. It is natural state of being when resistance dissolves. Resistance dissolves through acceptance, forgiveness, and alignment during life. Death completes this release by removing physical constraints that maintain separation. This does not imply that spiritual work should wait for death. Awareness of continuity invites alignment now. Living from presence prepares awareness for transition by reducing attachment to rigid identity. Preparation is not about ritual. It is about relationship to experience. When awareness is accustomed to letting go of fixed outcomes, it adapts more easily to final letting go of form. Presence, compassion, and integrity become practical training for continuity. They strengthen capacity to remain conscious through change rather than collapsing into fear. Understanding continuity also shifts perspective on endings in daily life. Every loss becomes rehearsal for larger transition. Each release strengthens ability to adapt. Change becomes less threatening. Flexibility increases. Curiosity replaces dread. The light beyond form also represents unity. Beyond individual separation, awareness recognizes itself as part of larger field of being. Distinctions that once defined identity soften. Connection becomes primary. This unity does not erase individuality in life. It contextualizes it. Individual expression becomes facet of shared existence rather than isolated struggle. From this view, compassion is not moral requirement. It is recognition of shared nature. Harm to another is felt as harm to whole. Care for another becomes care for self in wider sense. Death then is not departure into isolation. It is return into greater connection. This does not eliminate mystery. Mystery remains, but it becomes welcoming rather than threatening. Curiosity replaces anxiety. Awareness learns that not knowing is part of movement. Control is not required for continuity. Trust becomes possible. This trust changes how life is lived. Risk becomes tolerable. Authenticity increases. Expression becomes more honest because fear of final loss no longer dominates decision. Life becomes exploration rather than defense. Defense contracts awareness. Exploration expands it. Expansion aligns with continuity. The light beyond form symbolizes this expansion. It is awareness without boundary, learning without limitation, presence without fear. This does not diminish value of physical life. It enhances it. Knowing that awareness continues beyond form increases appreciation for unique opportunities that physical experience offers. Sensation, relationship, creativity, and learning through direct interaction. Physical life becomes precious not because it is all that exists, but because it is a distinct chapter within larger journey. Each chapter contributes understanding that enriches awareness across states of being. This understanding removes both despair and complacency. It encourages engagement without attachment. It supports effort without obsession. Death becomes transition rather than threat. Continuity becomes context rather than speculation. From this context, life is approached with seriousness of purpose and lightness of heart. Seriousness because growth matters. Lightness because outcome is not annihilation. This balance supports courage. Courage to love deeply, to change honestly, to risk expression, and to face difficulty with openness. When awareness holds this balance, fear loses dominance, presence increases, gratitude deepens. Life becomes preparation not for ending, but for continuity of being. Preparation through living fully, integrating experience, and aligning perception with truth. Truth here is simple. Awareness is not contained by form. It uses form to experience, learn, and express, then releases form when its function completes. What remains is light not as spectacle, but as clarity of presence, free from constraint, moving forward into wider field of being, carrying forward understanding gained through every moment of lived experience, steady and continuous beyond visible boundary of physical life. Awakening does not happen in isolation. Awareness unfolds within relationship, culture, and shared story. Individual insight ripples outward through behavior, language, and example, shaping the emotional climate of families, communities, and generations. In this way, personal transformation contributes to collective change, not by command, but by resonance. The rememberers are not a special group set apart by status. They are those who sense continuity of awareness beneath surface identity and allow that sense to guide how they live. Remembering here does not mean recalling past lives or cosmic history. It means recognizing, in ordinary moments, that awareness is larger than fear, habit, and social conditioning. This recognition changes how life is met. When fear no longer dominates perception, reaction softens. When reaction softens, communication changes. When communication changes, relationships reorganize. These reorganizations accumulate into cultural shifts that appear gradual yet profound over time. Collective consciousness is shaped by what is repeatedly expressed and reinforced. Narratives of competition, scarcity, and threat create environments where vigilance becomes normal. Narratives of cooperation, dignity, and shared growth create environments where trust becomes possible. The rememberers influence narrative through presence rather than persuasion. Calm increases, integrity under pressure, compassion without weakness. These qualities alter emotional tone in ways that logic alone cannot. Tone spreads faster than argument. Emotional states are contagious. Anxiety spreads through social networks. So does calm. Hope does not require agreement. It requires exposure. When one person remains steady, others unconsciously adjust to that steadiness. This adjustment does not always appear immediately, yet it shapes long-term behavior by redefining what feels possible and acceptable. Awakening of collective consciousness is not sudden enlightenment of entire populations. It is gradual reorientation of shared values, one relationship at a time. It appears as increased sensitivity to injustice, growing respect for mental health, and expanding concern for environmental impact. These shifts reflect changing priorities driven by deeper recognition of interconnection. Interconnection becomes visible when awareness stops seeing self as isolated unit and begins seeing behavior as influence. Every choice contributes to emotional environment that others must navigate. Responsibility then becomes relational rather than individualistic. Relational responsibility does not demand perfection. It invites mindfulness of impact. Words, timing, and attention all shape shared experience. The rememberers act from this mindfulness naturally because they perceive continuity between inner state and outer effect. They recognize that unresolved fear does not remain private. It expresses itself through tone, posture, and reaction. Thus, healing becomes contribution. As individuals integrate fear, resentment, and shame, they reduce unconscious projection. Reduced projection lowers conflict. Lower conflict allows cooperation to emerge. Cooperation strengthens social stability. Stability supports creativity. Creativity generates solutions. Solutions improve conditions. Conditions then support further growth. This cycle illustrates how inner transformation translates into societal change without centralized direction. Collective awakening also requires diversity of expression. Awareness learns through many perspectives. No single culture or belief system contains full understanding. Integration occurs through exchange of ideas, traditions, and experiences. When awareness becomes flexible, rigid ideology softens. Dialogue becomes possible. Curiosity replaces hostility. The rememberers encourage this flexibility by refusing to define identity solely by affiliation. They engage across differences without collapsing into conformity or retreating into separation. This engagement models coexistence without erasure of individuality. Collective consciousness matures when individuality and unity are no longer seen as opposites. Each supports the other. Unique expression enriches shared reality. Shared reality supports individual growth. Awakening is not withdrawal from society. It is deeper participation with greater responsibility and care. Participation includes speaking when harm is visible and listening when understanding is incomplete. It includes setting boundaries while maintaining compassion. It includes acting for justice without dehumanizing those who resist change. This balanced response requires emotional maturity that develops through personal work. Social change without inner work often reproduces the same power struggles it seeks to correct. The rememberers anchor change in coherence rather than reaction. Coherence does not mean neutrality. It means alignment between values and behavior. It means refusing to use methods that contradict desired outcomes. Peace cannot be built through humiliation. Dignity cannot be built through exclusion. These insights guide action when awareness remembers shared humanity. Collective awakening also depends on memory of suffering, not to perpetuate grievance, but to honor lessons learned. Historical awareness prevents repetition of patterns driven by denial. Memory here becomes teacher rather than weapon. The rememberers hold memory with responsibility. They acknowledge harm without allowing it to justify future harm. They work toward restoration rather than revenge. Restoration stabilizes societies by addressing root causes rather than symptoms. It requires patience, persistence, and willingness to confront discomfort. These qualities grow from inner stability. As more individuals cultivate presence, compassion, and clarity, social systems gradually adapt. Policies reflect shifting values. Education emphasizes emotional intelligence. Economics incorporates sustainability. Healthcare recognizes mind-body connection. These changes are not imposed from above. They arise from collective demand shaped by personal priorities. Collective consciousness is not abstract. It is expressed through everyday decisions, how conflicts are handled, how children are guided, how resources are shared, how differences are addressed. Small changes in these areas accumulate into cultural transformation. The rememberers accelerate this accumulation by embodying future values now. They live as if dignity and cooperation are already normal. making these states visible and attainable. Visibility matters. What is seen repeatedly becomes familiar. What becomes familiar becomes acceptable. What becomes acceptable becomes expected. Expectations shape institutions. Institutions then reinforce behaviors that align with those expectations. Thus, inner awakening influences outer structure through repetition of example. Collective awakening also requires confronting denial. Avoidance of uncomfortable truths delays growth. The rememberers approach truth with courage and care, neither shaming nor minimizing reality. They speak clearly without hostility. They listen without defensiveness. They adjust when evidence requires change. This adaptability strengthens trust. Trust enables cooperation across boundaries. Cooperation enables large-scale solutions that individual effort cannot achieve. The awakening of collective consciousness is therefore not a mystical event, but practical evolution of relationship patterns, communication styles, and shared priorities. Spiritual insight becomes social intelligence when it guides how power, resources, and opportunity are distributed. The rememberers understand that inner peace and social justice are connected. One cannot thrive while the other collapses. Stability of inner world supports ethical action. Ethical action supports stability of outer world. This reciprocity fuels long-term change. Collective awakening also respects timing. Systems do not change instantly. Resistance appears when pace exceeds readiness. Wise action balances urgency with patience. Patience here is not delay. It is strategic endurance. Endurance sustains effort across generations. Some seeds planted today will bear fruit beyond individual lifespan. Understanding continuity of consciousness supports willingness to invest in outcomes not personally witnessed. This long view encourages stewardship rather than exploitation. Stewardship extends to environment, culture, and future minds. It recognizes that present choices shape conditions for those yet to arrive. Awakening then becomes responsibility to both past and future, past for lessons, future for possibility. The rememberers live within this timeline, acting now with awareness of long arc of growth. Their influence is not always celebrated. Change often meets resistance. Yet quiet persistence outlasts loud opposition. Stability of presence becomes more persuasive than intensity of argument. As collective consciousness matures, competition gives way to collaboration, not because conflict disappears, but because cooperation proves more effective for survival and well-being. Effectiveness reshapes belief. Belief reshapes identity. Identity reshapes culture. Culture reshapes reality. This chain begins with awareness, choosing coherence over reaction in daily life. The rememberers are simply those who make this choice consistently enough to shift emotional climate around them. They do not wait for permission to live by deeper values. They practice them where they are, in families, workplaces, and communities. From these small arenas, influence expands. Awakening, then, is not distant ideal. It is lived process, unfolding through countless ordinary interactions, shaped by conscious attention. Collective consciousness awakens when enough individuals remember that what they carry inside shapes what they build outside. Remembering restores responsibility without burden and power without domination. From this remembering, a different future becomes not only imaginable, but increasingly probable, guided by awareness that recognizes itself not as isolated unit struggling for survival, but as participant in shared journey of learning, healing, and creative evolution across generations, steady and unfolding through the combined movement of individual clarity and collective intention. The journey does not end in achievement. It ends in remembering, not remembering facts, but remembering being. After movement through identity, desire, struggle, healing, and awakening, awareness arrives at a simple recognition: nothing essential was ever missing. What was sought through experience was recognition of what has always been present. Wholeness is not something added. It is what remains when separation dissolves. Separation is created by attention identifying with form, story, and role. These create necessary contrast for learning, yet they also create the sense of distance from origin. Through growth, awareness gradually loosens attachment to these limited definitions and begins to recognize itself as the field in which all experience appears. Union with the source is not merging of two things. It is realization that there were never two. The source is not distant. It is the awareness that looks through every perception, feels every emotion, and thinks every thought. It is not found by traveling outward, but by resting inward, where attention stops chasing identity and settles into presence. This resting does not remove individuality. It reveals individuality as expression rather than essence. Personality remains as unique pattern of movement. Yet awareness no longer mistakes pattern for origin. From this recognition, effort softens, life continues. Yet it is no longer driven by hunger for completion. Action arises from expression rather than compensation. Creativity flows because nothing is being proven. Service becomes natural because connection is felt rather than taught. Union expresses itself as coherence. Thought, emotion, and behavior align. Conflict decreases not because difficulty vanishes, but because resistance weakens. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It means clarity before response. Clarity allows action that is effective rather than frantic. In wholeness, attention no longer needs to defend identity. Defense gives way to openness. Openness invites learning without threat. Growth becomes refinement rather than repair. This state does not eliminate contrast. It changes relationship to it. Success does not inflate self. Failure does not diminish worth. Both become information guiding expression. Emotional waves still rise, yet they move through wider field of presence. They inform rather than dominate. Stability is not absence of feeling, but continuity of awareness through feeling. Union with the source feels like simplicity. Complex questions lose urgency. Meaning is no longer sought in explanation, but in direct experience of being alive, aware, and connected. Moments carry fullness without needing narrative. This fullness is not excitement. It is quiet satisfaction, steady and deep, independent of circumstance. From this fullness, relationships change. Others are no longer approached as sources of validation or completion. They are met as fellow expressions of the same underlying being, each exploring life through different conditions. Love becomes recognition rather than possession. Care becomes natural rather than negotiated. Boundaries remain, yet they are shaped by respect rather than fear. Forgiveness becomes easier because identity is no longer threatened by difference or mistake. Compassion becomes instinctive because separation is no longer believed. Union also transforms how time is perceived. Urgency decreases. Presence expands. Planning still happens. Yet it is held lightly. The future is no longer a battlefield of expectation. It becomes unfolding movement, guided by awareness. This does not remove responsibility. It clarifies it. Responsibility shifts from controlling outcome to aligning intention and response. Integrity becomes central value. Integrity here means coherence between inner knowing and outer action. When awareness recognizes itself as source of intention, action naturally reflects deeper truth. This coherence generates trust in self and others. Interaction becomes smoother. Cooperation becomes easier. Conflict becomes less personal. Union with the source does not create isolation. It creates belonging at deeper level than social approval. Belonging to existence itself removes fear of exclusion. From this belonging, courage arises. Courage to speak truth without aggression. Courage to change direction without shame. Courage to remain kind without weakness. This courage is not dramatic. It is steady, rooted in certainty that awareness is not fragile, even when form is challenged. Wholeness also deepens gratitude, not gratitude for specific outcomes alone, but gratitude for existence itself, for opportunity to experience, learn, and express through form. Every moment becomes gift of participation. Participation replaces striving. Striving seeks to arrive. Participation enjoys movement. Life becomes less about destination and more about quality of presence within process. This does not reduce ambition. It refines it. Ambition becomes desire to express potential rather than to secure worth. Potential then unfolds naturally, guided by interest and alignment rather than fear. Union also dissolves spiritual hierarchy. No one is closer to the source than another, because the source is equally present in all awareness. Differences in behavior reflect differences in learning stage, not difference in essence. This recognition supports humility without diminishing confidence. Confidence rests in being rather than achievement. From this confidence, leadership becomes service rather than control. Influence becomes invitation rather than pressure. Collective awakening then becomes natural extension of individual wholeness. Those who live from union contribute stability and clarity to shared space, shaping culture through presence rather than ideology. Wholeness does not require withdrawal from society. It enhances participation by reducing reactivity and increasing responsibility. Union also changes relationship to death. When awareness recognizes itself as source rather than form, the transition of form loses terror. Continuity becomes intuitive. Life is seen as chapter, not entirety. This does not diminish love for physical life. It increases appreciation. Knowing that experience is temporary makes attention more present, more tender, more engaged. Each interaction becomes opportunity to express understanding rather than to secure outcome. Union does not create perfection. It creates forgiveness for imperfection. Mistakes become part of learning rather than evidence of failure. Growth becomes continuous rather than conditional. This attitude supports resilience. Setbacks do not collapse motivation, they inform adaptation. Adaptation becomes natural response of living system in harmony with itself. The return to wholeness is not dramatic event at end of journey. It unfolds gradually through repeated recognition of presence in ordinary moments. It appears in patience during conflict, honesty during uncertainty, and calm during change. These moments accumulate into stable awareness. Stable awareness recognizes source not as distant origin, but as current reality expressing through perception, breath, thought, and action. Union, then, is not escape from world. It is intimate participation with it, free from illusion of separation. From this participation, purpose becomes simple, to express awareness through form with clarity, kindness, and coherence. There is no final state beyond this, only deepening of expression. Learning continues, creativity continues, relationship continues. What ends is belief in isolation. What remains is connection. Connection does not require effort. It is recognized when effort stops trying to be something other than what is already here. In this recognition, peace is not achieved. It is revealed as the natural state of awareness when it no longer resists itself. From this peace, action continues, but it is guided by alignment rather than anxiety. Life becomes conversation between awareness and expression, steady and responsive, moving through changing forms without losing sense of origin. Union with the source is thus not distant goal. It is present reality recognized through clarity of attention. The return to wholeness is return to simplicity, to being rather than becoming, to presence rather than pursuit. From that return, the journey continues, not as search for completion, but as unfolding of expression, where awareness explores its own depth through endless variations of experience, always grounded in the same quiet center, complete, connected, and at peace within the ongoing movement of life.